Check, 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 check.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. It's great seeing such a large crowd. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we have an all-star cast for you this evening. Features first Arch Campbell, who, of course, was a very familiar presence on TV. There's a very familiar presence on TV here in the Washington area from the mid-1970s to the mid-2010s. He's here to talk about his new memoir, The Accidental Critic, and helping to keep him in line and on message is a former on-air teammate, Doreen Gentzler. Arch's career as a movie reviewer and features reporter really began in 1973 when his boss charged into the newsroom and yelled, "I want a movie reviewer. Who wants to do it?" At the time, Arch was working for a TV station in Dallas, and he raised his hand, and thus he was launched on a lifelong path of broadcasting about movies and entertainment, about unusual places and oddball people. A year later, Arch, who was then 28, left Texas for Washington and went on to work for WRC-TV here in the DC area. He stayed with the station more than 3 decades, then in 2007 joined another local operation, WJLA-TV, and retired 8 years after that. Over the course of his lengthy career, Arch received 8 Emmy Awards, an Arts Award from DC's mayor, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Capital Radio and Television Museum. No doubt, many of you took your cues on what movies to like or dislike from Arch, and his many feature pieces and ad-libs on air, I'm sure, engendered a smile, if not an outright laugh. As with many local stations, he was part of a team of broadcasters whose personalities would show through and convey a sense of family. In Arch's case, the grouping for many years included Jim Vance as news anchor, George Michael on sports, and Bob Ryan on weather. Doreen joined the team in 1989 and quickly proved herself able, as Arch writes, to hold her own with what had looked until then like a boys' club. Arch's book is filled with recollections not only of his teammates and of the reviews and feature pieces he did, but of the great times he had and with fellow staff and his interviews and other encounters with some of the most prominent figures in the entertainment business. And given how well he and Doreen got along, it's very apt that she'd be here this afternoon to moderate the discussion. She spent more than 33 years anchoring News 4 at 6 and News 4 at 11 for NBC locally and winning a number of Emmys before retiring from the station. Did I say enemies? I meant Emmys, of course. Before, she might have made a few enemies, but I don't think they're here this evening. And she retired from the station 2 years ago. Please join me in welcoming Arch and Doreen.
Oh my God, what do we talk about now?
I know. I know. My goodness, this is quite a crowd you've attracted here, Arch.
Welcome to my funeral. And I'd like to thank you all for being here.
This is great, and it's also for us. It's really nice to see some longtime friends in the crowd, and kind of like a reunion for us. So it's lovely. Arch and I worked together for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And I was sorry to see him leave Channel 4 when he did. It was quite a disappointment, but he came back on his feet and continued to do the great work that he did for so many years at Channel 4. I'd like to start with some more about, Brad mentioned it, but what the Accidental Critic, what is that all about?
I started in television in 1971, which is more than 50 years ago. And I became a movie critic, literally, because we had a new boss. And at that time in television, when I think back about it now, it occurs to me that I'm the second generation of television people. I think you and I are the second generation. And later on, we'll talk about the new generation and the markers that kind of ended our time. In fact, remind me, I have a great going away story. But anyway, I was going through my first upheaval, and we got a new boss, and he comes in and screams, "I want a movie reviewer. Who wants to do it?" And so by accident, I became the movie critic. But before that, really, I was the accidental newsman, because I came to work in Dallas, and I was working at a radio station, and I wanted to get into news, but I went to the news director. He says, I don't like the way you sound, and we don't want you. And I had just gotten married, and I got a job in Atlanta at a big radio station, WSB, and they would let me do half news and half announcing. I thought, this is the way I'll get into news. So I resigned, and my wife resigned, and they didn't want to lose her, honestly. So they called her in. They said, "What would it take to keep your husband here?" She said, "Well, he wants to work in television news." So they call me and they say, "Oh, why don't you, we'll take you in our TV news department." I said, "Well, that would be nice, but, I've got this other thing and I've accepted the job." And the manager says, "Let's get that guy on the phone right now." So he calls Atlanta and puts us on speaker, and he says, "Arch has something to tell you." So I say, "I've gotten an offer to go to work in the TV news department." He says, "What do you mean you've gotten another offer?" And the manager, he says, "Listen, this is a big break for him." And the two guys start arguing. And the manager in Dallas says, "Well, he's staying here, so that's it. Goodbye." And then he says, "Welcome to television news." And I was on my way. So the first accident happened. I think the woman who made that possible might be here. I don't. Oh, she is. Would you like to take a bow? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So that is the happy accident that got me into television. And here I am all these years later.
We both feel, we've talked about this a bunch, how fortunate the two of us feel that we worked and had the privilege of working in local TV news during a time when it was great fun. When it was still covering the local news, and it was still about personalities, and you knew the people in your community and all of that. Talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen over the years?
Well, the first change that occurs to me that people have forgotten is that in the 70s, I came to Channel 4 in 1974. I was recommended by a guy I had worked with in Dallas named Don Harris, who was a legendary newsman. And there is quite a history and story about Don Harris. But he recommended me. He went to Los Angeles and worked for a guy at KNBC. And this guy, Bruce McDonald, who came to WRC, had started as a joke writer for Soupy Sales.
Okay.
Do you remember Soupy Sales?
Yes.
He had a kid show,
Yes.
and every day at the end of the show, he got a pie in the face. And his term as a joke writer got him to New York, and somehow he got to Los Angeles and NBC and ran the special projects unit. And he says to Don Harris, do you know anybody who does offbeat stuff? Because once I got into that newsroom, and after I had struggled for quite a while, I was pulled aside by one of these great characters. This is a guy named Bert Shipp, who would smoke. He smoked a pack of Salems every day, and he lined the butts up over his desk, and there's a cloud of smoke coming out from the assignment desk, and somebody would go out on a crime story. He'd scream, "Ask him if he feared for his life." He had been one of these ambulance chasers, wrecks and fires. And when I came in the early 70s, I was a college graduate, and we were the people kind of taking the place of the thrill seekers, the ambulance people. So anyway, Bert pulls me aside. He says, everybody in this newsroom can cover a wreck or a fire. But if you find something unique, if you can make a funny story, something to end the news, you'll find a place in this newsroom. It was wonderful advice. And he started feeding me stories about farmers raising goats that would faint if you made a noise around them. And let's see, what was another one?
Well, tell about. Are you in Washington now? When you're you're still in Texas.
I'm still getting ready.
All right.
This is how I came to Washington.
Okay.
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 You know, I'm so glad I'm not interviewing me, because I am the longest talker now. For 40 years, I had a minute and 15 seconds. And now I've got all of this time to actually talk. This is wonderful. Anyway, I found they sent me to Ponder, Texas, and there was this little restaurant there. It was the only thing in Ponder, Texas. And it was the kind of Texas place where if you ordered a steak, you would hear a buzzsaw in the back, and they'd cut a piece of meat for you. There's a movie I especially like, Hell or High Water. And there's a scene in there where they go to a restaurant and the waitress says, "Which don't you want?" And they say, "What? Which don't you want? We serve meat, we serve potatoes, and then you get green beans or corn. You get 3. Which don't you want?" Well, I'm convinced this was that place, the Ranchman's Cafe. And a lot of people had written about it, and it was a delightful place. It had no public restroom. Nobody, and I can't imagine that a place would operate like that at this time of life. But back then, it had no public restroom. So I'm interviewing the woman that ran it and owned it, and I said, "What do you do if you need the restroom?" She says, "Well, you can go out to the barn or go to the filling station about a mile down the road." So I ended the piece with a shot of me coming out and walking down this dusty road, and I voiced over This is Arch Campbell looking for that filling station about a mile down the road. Well, Don Harris told this joke writer that story. He called me up. He says, send me it. And the next thing I knew, I was hired to come to Washington. So that's another great accident.
Well, where you continue to excel in these kind of crazy offbeat stories, like the pig that you adopted.
The joke writer calls me in. He says, I've been reading the National Observer, which is a long gone newspaper. He says the USDA has bred miniature pigs. They want to do research on them. And they've decided that the research is no good. So now they've got all these small pigs, and they want people to use them as pets. So I want you to get one of these and raise him as a pet. So I called USDA, and for $60, they said, yeah, come out to the University of Maryland. We've got your pig. And so they wheel this card out, and I pull out something about the size of a puppy. And so I named him Spot, and I took him home. I put his food in one corner of a room in the basement, and I put newspapers in the other corner. And within 2 days, he was paper trained.
Nice.
And then, we bonded. I got to where I could walk him on a leash, and I decided to do a story on him. And on the story, I walk him around town and play with him. And at the end of it, I'm in bed saying what a nice night it was, and the camera pulls out, and Spot is in bed with me. We did about 3 stories like that. I would bring the pig to NBC, and it would run up and down the halls. And the local newsroom was another collection of characters. People loved that, but the network side would look out there and say, despicable. And Channel 4 was going to reinvent the wheel, and it turned out it blew up in their face. The reinvention did not work. So I had to struggle and find my place. And the place finally happened when a general manager came and started looking at us, at those of us who were there, and said, we can win in Washington if we operate as a team. He says, we might not win one-on-one. I think he looked at me when he said that. But we can win as a team. And that idea took hold. They started a series of commercials of us doing various things. And he put together a team, and the team came together from Kismet. In the 70s, we had 4 or 5 anchor men. By the end of the 70s, Jim Vance was the only person left. All of them had left. At the end of the 70s, this manager had a big idea, and this guy is here, so I think I'm going to tell this story correctly. The manager I'm talking about, John Rohrbeck, decided he would team Jim Vance and Gordon Peterson, the 2 biggest names in Washington. I think Mr. Peterson is here somewhere. There he is. And Gordon, as he has told me, I think I'm correct, Gordon wanted to do it because Channel 9 had owned the Washington Post Corporation owned Channel 9, and they traded stations, afraid that they would lose the station because of concentration of media, which it turned out they didn't need to, but they traded the station. And Gordon said that his contract was with the Post, not the Detroit News, the new owners. And they went to court. I hope I'm not telling a story, Gordon, but you told me later the judge ruled against you and you ran into the judge. The judge said, well, I didn't want to change channels.
Oh my God.
Is that correct? Am I correct? Would you like to take a bow?
For the record, Gordon is giving one of these.
So then there we are, and Willard Scott left, and the whole station emptied out. Vance and I were the only two people left standing. The manager said, we're going to get a team together. Bob Ryan came to Channel 4 at a time when they traded Willard to the Today Show for Bob, at a time when people suddenly realized that weather is serious. It's in the 70s, it was a joke. Weather is something serious. And within a few weeks, Bob was the only person to forecast a snowstorm, and suddenly he was everybody's hero. And he's over there. Look at him. I know how old he is, but he looks like he's about 30. You've got a picture down in the basement somewhere, don't you? That's aging.
Is this a good time for a little reading?
Yes. All right.
I don't mean to interrupt your story. Well, Arch has a lot of anecdotes. Can you tell?
All right. I originally thought this was going to start with a reading from the book, but I am going to read a little short chapter. Now, just leading into this to wrap things up, George Michael came, Bob came. They called me in. They said, we want you on the news at the end of the show every night. Do anything you want. You want to do movie reviews? Fine, do that. We don't care. We just want you at the end. And Jim Vance was the guy left. And it was, this is the guy we're going to go on. So suddenly the four of us are all together in 1980. And that team idea bonded us, and we really became friends and started hanging out. So this is a little chapter, and I'm going to read this quick. How are we? We're all right on time. Wow. This is a little chapter called Please Return the Towels. And I'll read this quick so as not to overload it, but here we go. Bob Ryan and his wife Olga live a gracious, sophisticated life that includes world travel. One night I told him my wife and I planned to travel to Germany as part of a trip for her business. Bob discussed Munich and the Alps and the German resort town of Baden-Baden, home of the famous Bremer's Park Hotel. Bob's wife's relatives lived near Baden-Baden. So we took Bob's advice, and Brenner's Park lived up to its reputation, an old-school European hotel, spa, medical clinic. Legend says the staff notes every detail of your stay. When you return, they greet you by name and remember what you enjoyed. We visited Baden-Baden's most famous site, the new Schwanstein Castle, high on a mountaintop. Walt Disney modeled Fantasyland on New Schwanstein. We walked down a steep 1-mile path back to the hotel. That night, my ankle hurt. The next morning, I couldn't put any weight on it. The hotel sent up a doctor and nurse. The nurse pulled out a hypodermic. The doctor wrapped my ankle. The clinic sent up crutches. I attracted quite a lot of attention as I hobbled around the world-class resort, knowing that if I returned, a staff member would ask, "How's your ankle?" Back in D.C., the doctor diagnosed a bruised tendon, and I healed. Later that summer, a letter arrived from Bremer's Park with a Baden-Baden postmark. I opened the letter and read in large block red letters, Please return the towels. I showed the letter to my wife. Furious, she sat down at her typewriter and wrote, "Dear Sir, I am very offended by your letter accusing us of taking towels from the hotel. I can't imagine how you would think we are that kind of people. We went to Brimmer's Park because we heard about your warm welcome and personal service. This is obviously not true. We did not take your towels." Back in the newsroom, Bob and I hung around as usual, joking and gossiping. Time passed. A year went by. One night, during a lull in our conversation, Bob turned to me with a little smirk and said, "Did you ever get my letter?" Well, that's when it hit me. Please return the towels. Bob's wife had relatives in Baden-Baden. They attended a family wedding that summer. He got some stationery. I think we laughed for about 15 minutes as I told him about our irate response. And that is why I can never go back to Baden-Baden, Germany's Brimmer's Park Hotel. Now, that's why I wanted to write this collection of stories, because I didn't want to forget that.
Well, that's my next question. Why did you write this? I mean, this is hard work. How long have you been working on this autobiography? What gave you the idea to put it all together?
I started working on it when we got computers at the station, because when Bob and I weren't getting into trouble.
And I was shocked to hear that there was a lull in the conversation between you and Bob, to be honest. But go ahead. Sorry. Couldn't resist.
You know, we laid out a golf course. Did you ever see us when we were playing golf?
I think I did, yes, in the hallway.
We had a golf course. I had a 5-iron there, and we would hit golf balls down the hall and then out and around the studios. And one night I hit down and the ball flew up and it smashed an exit sign.
Uh-oh.
So we stopped that. But anyway, why did I write this? Well, I wanted to remember the things that bound us together. And I collected stories, and I started them when we had our computer. And then once I retired, I really wanted to put these together. And as I worked, I went to the Writers Center and had a lot of fun there and got some really good instruction and help from them. And somebody asked me, Kathy McCampbell Vance is here, and she asked me I feel like Ed Sullivan introducing people from the audience. She asked me how I put it together, and it struck me I needed an ending. So I got an ending because, you know, I go on and on. I worked there 32 years. Times changed. Some storm clouds hit the horizon. I was pushed out. The band broke up. I got an ending because 10 years after I left, Bob and I were invited to come back and record some work for you. You were inducted into the Silver Circle. And being invited back was the piece of healing I needed after I left Channel 4. Not that I didn't have a wonderful time at Channel 7. You know, we were a family at Channel 4, and then I had 8 years at Channel 7, and we were a family at Channel 7. We were the children of divorce. We were a blended family. We had this thing in common that we all left a place we loved before we wanted to leave it. So I had this ending that I was invited back, and Bob and I roamed the station, and people are looking at us. Is that really, who is that? And it was after I left Channel 4. I don't think I've told you this. I could not drive down Nebraska Avenue. I would circle around. I would go up to Western when I needed to go across town rather than in front of Channel 4, just because it was half of my life there. So I got that ending that we were invited back, and that's when I started putting together. And then I got a second ending, and that was the death of Jim Vance. And we really haven't, we need to talk about Vance in his different versions and in the different decades that he worked. But to me, the death of Jim Vance and the service for him, the public service at the National Cathedral, was literally the end of an era. That I don't think ever again a station would have a strong voice like Vance for 48 years and as strong a figure in the community as Vance for all of those years. And his service was a coda, sort of. I think it was the end of the second generation. And I'm not in any means saying that what happens now in TV is worse than what we used to do. What I'm saying is things are different now. But that was important. The cathedral was full of people who worked in TV and people who worked with Vance. But it was also full of viewers.
Right.
And out in front, there was a line of like 100 motorcycles of people who knew he liked motorcycles. And after the service, I mean, there was a reception that a lot of people went to, but the people who were viewers just stood out in front of the cathedral and visited. They did, they chilled. It was extraordinary. It was quite touching.
People think about Vance as this badass who rode motorcycles and leather jackets and kind of got in trouble all the time. And but to me, he was one of the most sensitive people I've ever known. He would walk in the makeup room before a show, and he could, without saying a word, he could say, "What's going on? What's bothering you?" How many people do you know who are like that? So he was one of a kind.
We had offices in the years I was there, and my office was 2 doors down from Vance's. And especially at night, a woman I worked with at the Writers Center said, "Why don't you write about what went on at night after all the real people left?" And, we were there at night. And first you'd walk by Vance's office, and occasionally he would say, "My man." And then that was your invitation to come in and visit. And George Michael would go in there, and there'd just be a cloud of smoke coming out from that place. And he had a stereo system and cool jazz. And sometimes I could hear him and George, and they were, "That bastard," and they did this. And the criticism I particularly loved was when I could hear them talking about carpetbaggers, meaning the bosses that would come in from some other town and try to run that place. And the thing about Vance is he spoke truth to power and stopped a lot of bad things from happening. And he would speak up for the rest of us. And he was a leader. He was a real leader.
He was like the North Star in that newsroom.
He honestly was. And when he passed away, that, it was nice that I got that return and I could heal. But then when Vance passed away, it was something has changed. This is a change. And then I got a third ending. You want to talk about Vance more?
Go ahead. Can I stop? I mean, do we have a choice?
I don't know. We're actually doing all right on time. This is great. The third ending came with COVID. And when COVID happened, people stopped going to movies. And when COVID happened, the Uptown Theater closed. Mm-hmm. And I went to, and I see a lot of my friends from those red carpet days too, to numerous premieres at the Uptown. Hollywood would have a premiere in LA, New York, and then often Washington. It was always at the Uptown. And I never dreamed the Uptown Theater would close. And I'm almost again to the point that I can't drive down Connecticut Avenue because it hurts so much to see the Uptown Theater closed. But the Uptown closed, COVID happened, movies changed to streaming, and the world changed. So I had three endings.
It's not the shared experience that it used to be.
And that's what I love to write about that. When I would, even before I was reviewing movies, I spent a lot of time at the AFI when it was at Kennedy Center and at the Circle Theater downtown and the Biograph and the Key and all those wonderful places and the movies they showed and the rep days when films that were 30 or 40 years from the 40s would attract an audience and to share in the audience experience and to hear them. I particularly remember walking into Raiders of the Lost Ark, and nobody knew what's this? It's Harrison Ford in something. And that thing starts, and he goes in the cave and he trips the wire and the boulder starts rolling toward him and he's chasing and running and the audience is just, whoa, 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 just riled up and I think they applauded at the end of it. And that's so special. So I am reminded in the 80s, I did a series on pioneer broadcasters, the people who started in television when television started. And there were a lot of them still working around here in the 80s, and I knew a lot of them. So I interviewed Pick Temple, had this kids show on Channel 9 that was huge. He was the first performer to make $50,000 a year in the 1950s, when that was a lot of money. And I interviewed Willard, of course, and Mac McGarry. And I interviewed a woman named Inga Hook. Inga had been the fashion editor of the either the Washington Star or the Times Herald, one of the papers. And she got her own show on Channel 4 in 1951. Very glamorous. And, they were kind of making television up as they go along. And she was kind of like Zsa Zsa Gabor, really, just Danish, well-known around town, Inga. And I'm interviewing Inga, and she's telling me all the things she did. And we wrap up the interview. She says, "Oh, Archie, the day you leave television, that is the day Your conversation is no longer interesting. Your jokes are no longer funny. You are no longer cute. And Kathy McCampbell Vance produced that series, and she and I laughed and laughed and laughed about that. And hell, she was right. Oh, hell.
I think we want to take some time to hear what your questions are for Arch, but we've been hearing a lot of anecdotes and a lot of great stories about local news. There are really three parts to this book that you've written. One part is kind of a history of local television news through the lens of Arch's experiences. The other part is about some of the famous people that you've interviewed and met over the years, and there are some great stories there. And then the third part is your life story and all about your family in the South. And you told me not to read that part because you thought it was boring, but I found that to be probably the most interesting part of that book. How did you decide how to put all of that together?
I was working on two memoirs, actually, one about growing up and one about working in television. And then it struck me, I was able to survive in a newsroom because I survived my family. My family had these outrageous, it was sort of a blended family. We'd get together Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, all of these times. It was full of characters. And at Thanksgiving, I had my own version of Jim Vance and George Michael, which was my father and his cousin, and they would, so-and-so did this, and then they would whisper, dirty, did you hear the one? And I realized that family like that is a newsroom. So, and my father loved to drive me around town. He was afraid of my mother. He did, and he went into business and went broke, and it never was right between him and my mother again. And so to keep peace in the family, he would run errands at night and take me with him. And riding in the car to mail a letter became mail the letter, then you ride around. That's where Frenchie's Black Cat was, which is a real restaurant in San. And they had a sign, if you walk in here and there's nobody in the restaurant, we'll give you a free meal. And then the letter turned into, we have to go to the train station because we can put it on the train. And then if we mailed the letter on the train, we'd drive across town to watch the train, when it came across. And my parents talked. They liked to tell stories. And that's why I put it in. Nobody had the Father Knows Best, Ozzie and Harriet background. And I think as you get older, you really appreciate where you came from and what it did for you.
You dedicated your book to your father.
He was my best friend. So there you are.
Okay. See what I mean about that being one of the best parts of the book? So do you have questions? Anybody have something they want to ask Arch? Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you for being here. This is great. Arch and Doreen, great to see you. I'm tempted to ask you what you think of the new great crop of movies that are out there now. Brutalist, The Complete Unknown, Nora. If you could share, that'd be wonderful. I don't know.
Well, I like The Brutalist, and I went to see The Brutalist with our friend Cinema Lou, who could not be here tonight. But I do a podcast about movies now, and I've got the wife, the husband of a woman we all know, all he does is go to the movies. He's like Mr. Vox Populi. He's got an AMC pass, and AMC is really losing money on him. So we went over to the AFI to see The Brutalist, and I like The Brutalist a lot because it's long and it has an intermission, and it's an interesting story, and maybe not the greatest movie ever made, but I like The Brutalist. And right now, everybody who asks me what's good to see, I tell them to go see the Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, and it's at the Avalon Theater. And whenever I can, I try to go to the Avalon. And what's going to win the Oscars? I guess The Brutalist. I don't know if anybody has seen The Substance. I would love to hear the audience comments after The Substance. I love the fact that they advertise The Substance with, "This movie is insane." She's probably going to win the Oscar.
Thank you so much.
I want everyone to know that in his book, Arch goes through at the end. He's got every year that he has been reviewing movies. He's got his top favorites. So it's a bonus included with his book. And you've given me some great movie recommendations over the years of movies that I think about. Waking Ned Devine.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I would have never seen that if you hadn't said, "Oh, this is a great movie. You have to go and see it." So.
I'm remembering the night you and Vance went to see Bad Santa between newscasts.
Terrible story. That is.
I want to hear more about
that. Probably no one who's at this bookstore for this reading tonight would have been to see Bad Santa. It was very tasteless.
Billy Bob Thornton says it's the most quoted movie to him.
Is it?
When he meets
Really?
people, it's the movie everybody asks about.
Well,
Bad Santa.
we walked in there together and watched the movie and laughed so hard we were crying. It was just it's a terrible movie. But it was also funny in a very crude way. But it was just what we needed at that moment, I guess.
I think the rating book must have just ended.
Maybe something like that. Yes, we were always kind of stressed out during ratings periods. Yes, sir.
What can TV journalists do, as you, Doreen and Arch, do so well, have done so well, to improve American writing and speaking? Because beyond the interestingness that comes across, you are solid writers and solid speakers. That, for example, Doreen, you asked Arch, what gave you the idea to put it all together, referring to the book? Versus so much American speech now would have it as, what gave you the idea to put it all together?
Want to take that one, Arch? I think that the standards are lower. The social media piece and the online piece of news coverage now is a big factor in it's less taken less seriously. What else am I leaving out? I think I also this is important. The people who are working in television news are and in every journalistic enterprise, the deadlines never end. It's 24/7, and the people who are on the air, years ago there were little short news breaks in the morning news in the Today Show, and there was a 6 o'clock news and an 11 o'clock news, maybe a noon news, 5 o'clock, 5:30. Now it's 8 hours or more of news every day, and that lends itself to some sloppy work, I think.
And television, it doesn't have to be on the air.
Right.
They can
yes.
post it on YouTube or
Right.
their website. So we had our fun during the waiting times, and especially
There's no downtime now.
There's no downtime.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been playing golf in the hallway.
Oh, God. You know, of a football game or what else? A special event, the stuff that went on until midnight. Those were great nights.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but we hear you.
And I hear you. Thank you, and have heard you.
Thank you.
The great writer P.D. St. Clair.
Thank you. That's all I wanted. I want to know what happened to the pig.
Well, I took him to a country club for pets out in. They agreed to take him. They had a big acreage out in Columbia, Maryland, and I let him go out there. We did a final story, and he's in slow motion, loping through the fields to Born Free. We put Born Free under him. And I went back to see him a couple of times, and I swear he would be across the field, spot me, and run right towards me, just like a little dog. But he got out on Route 29, and they say it was a Hormel truck, but I hope not. That's they say.
R.I.P.
You ever had little sausages?
Yes.
In the pantheon of former News 4 personalities, the one who maybe understandably doesn't get talked about is Steve Doocy of Fox News. So I would love a couple Steve Doocy stories.
Now, was Steve Doocy there when you were there?
He was. We intersected by just like 6 months to a year, so I didn't really work alongside Steve.
He was extremely talented. He had the ability to do funny stories, and he had an understanding of how to use the technology, green screens, and whatever, digital stuff, whatever they had. And this was the mid 80s, 86, 89, something like that. And I had a late night show, and I would have him on there. And I felt like Salieri looking at Mozart. Honestly, he was very talented. And in all the years he was there, 5 or 6, I never heard him say one word about politics. Never. And then later I heard, I hear he's doing, and Fox has some morning show and he does the weather on it. And so I don't know Steve Doocy now, but I just remember that he was extremely talented and had a wonderful sense of humor. And
Thank you.
You want to take the next one?
Hey, Arch. Hey, Doreen.
Hi.
Hey, Joe Yasharoff here. On behalf of everyone, I think it's safe to say we all miss you a lot, watching you on TV.
Thank you.
A lot. Arch, I wanted to ask you, all the interviews you've ever done, what's the one that stands out and why?
I've got an answer to that. I really do.
Yeah.
John Travolta came to the Udvar Hazy Museum the day it opened. And if you know anything about him, he is an airplane fanatic. He has his own 707. He has a little pilot's uniform that he wears. He's with the cap and everything. He flew his own plane to Dulles, And the Smithsonian called and said, Travolta's going to be here doing satellite interviews. Do you want to do one of the satellites? And our great assignment guy, Charlie Bergali, said, we're not going to do a satellite. We'll just send Arch out there. So what time is he going to finish? And they said, about noon. So we go out there, and Travolta's, if you do satellite, you're all hooked up and looking at the camera and all of this stuff. So he finishes, and I said, look, we just want to put a mic on you, and will you just show us the planes you like around here? He says, oh, yeah, man. So he puts the mic on, and it was like you trying to talk to me. I couldn't shut him up. He went occasionally, one time he asked me, what do you like here? And I said, the Concorde, because I did a story where people would go out to the Dulles Access Road, pull off, because there was no development out there, and I think it's about 4:30 in the afternoon, watch the Concorde land. It was thrilling. I think he went on for an hour and a half. We couldn't shut him up. And later I ran into him and he said, I remember you. That was the best interview I ever did. And it was because he wasn't plugging anything. Uh-huh. He was talking about something he liked. He wasn't pushing a movie. And it was one of the best interviews I ever did.
Thank you very much.
So I've got a question. Is there anything in your book that people will be surprised by?
I think they'll be surprised that I take a lot of time to thank the people who helped me, mm-hmm. and that it's not a collection of name drops, but it's the story about a couple of teachers in high school who really helped me, and the story of my friendship with an extraordinary woman who started the radio television department of a community college, and how I stayed with her, and the opportunity I had to speak about her when they named a new building for her. And so I hope they will be surprised that it's not a series of name drops and, oh boy, aren't I great? Because I'm not. I'm an accident. I'm the accidental critic, and I'm no longer cute.
I still think you're pretty cute, Arch. And I can recommend Arch's book. I read it. I got to read it before it got printed, and it's wonderfully well written, I think, and it shares a whole side of you that your people who have watched you for years have never seen before. And I'm proud of you for writing it. It's got to be one of the hardest things to do.
I think we're wrapping up. I'm feeling the wrap coming. Uh-huh. The first thing I want to say is how grateful I am to you and overwhelmed that you would come here for this book and this signing, and how much it means to me to be here with you.
I volunteered. You didn't have to twist my arm, Arch. I'm honored to be invited to do this.
I want to mention the staff of Opus Books, Ellie Miranda, and she has a wingman, Danny, and if you get a bookmark, Danny designed the bookmark, and Bradley Graham owns Politics and Prose and is the man who has kept this business going, and when he took over Politics and Prose, it was not a slam dunk. And he was well ahead of the independent bookstore movement. And this is the beating heart of this neighborhood. I love coming over here and just looking around, seeing who's downstairs. This is an important part of what makes Washington so great. So those are some thank yous.
We're fortunate to have Politics and Prose in Washington.
Well, I can't top that. Thank you, Arch and Doreen. Copies of Arch's book are available at the front. And when he referred to Opus, Opus is our self-publishing service. Politics and Prose has a self-publishing operation. We're very happy to be able to provide that service. And we were very touched when Arch came to us and said, would you please print my book? And it's great that all of you came out. Thank you for coming. Our staff would appreciate it if you would fold up your chairs. Arch will be up here signing. Please form a line to the right of the table. Good night.